Today's lesson is going to be on solving multi-step equations by combining like terms and using the distributive property. So that's what this CLT and D means. That's combining like terms and the distributive property there. Okay, so remember back to last unit, we solved one-step equations and we solved two-step equations. So we're going to be doing that today, just kind of going one step further. So let's first review, in our review exercises, we're going to review combining like terms and the distributive property. So let's start with number 1. When we combine like terms, remember, we're going to combine all of the same variables, right? So I have the 3x plus the 4x. That's going to combine to give me 7x. I want to do the same thing for all the numbers. Those are also like terms. So -5, -6, +1. I'm going to combine those. And hopefully you notice I always attach the sign that comes in front of it. So if I add up -5 plus -6 plus 1, I'm going to get a -10 here. So my final answer would be 7x minus 10. I cannot go any further because those are not like terms. So that's where I stop. So that is combining like terms. Now let's review the distributive property. So looking at number 2, when I use the distributive property, I take that number on the outside and I distribute it to what's on the inside. Distributing is multiplication. So 6 times 3 is going to give me 18. 6 times -2 is going to give me a negative or a minus right here. 6 times 2 is 12x. This is my final answer. And remember, you can't go any further because those are not like terms. You have 18 minus 12x. One's a number, one's a variable, so that's all you have to do for that one. So hopefully that was a good review of combining like terms and the distributive property. We will be using both of those today. All right, so we are going to be talking about solving equations now where you have to combine like terms and distribute. So there's kind of 3 steps you want to take when you're doing these equations. The first step, always, if you can distribute, you want to use the distributive property first. The second step, step 2, is after you distribute, that is when you're going to combine like terms, if you can. The third step is then you are going to isolate that variable on one side of the equation using those inverse operations. So we're going to solve for the variable as our last step, kind of like we were doing, remember, in our last unit solving basic equations. So we're doing that again, we're just taking this one step further this unit. So let's look at example 1. I'll leave those steps up for there for you so you can copy those down. Make sure you copy those down so you remember what step you're taking first. You can always look back at your notes. So my first step is the distributive property. However, in example 1, there is no distributive property, right? There's no number outside parentheses. So I'm going to move on to step 2, combine like terms. So I'm going to draw my line down my equal sign. Like terms are always going to be on the same side of the equal sign. That is why I like to draw my line. If those are on the same side, I'm going to combine like terms. So in this case, I have that 6m plus the 1m. And I'm going to combine those to give me a 7m. I'm going to drop down that minus 23, and that equals 5. So when I'm combining like terms, make sure they are on the same side of the equal sign. That's super important. Now we're going to move on to step 3. We already combined like terms. Now I'm going to isolate that variable on one side of the equal sign. So I'm going to try to solve for this m right here. I want to get that m by itself. In order to do that, I need to use inverse operations. So thinking back to last unit, we want to get rid of this minus 23. So the opposite of subtraction is I need to add 23 to both sides. Once I do that, I'm going to get 28 equals 7m. I'm still trying to solve for this m here, get this m by itself. So I still need to divide both sides by 7. Because 7m is multiplication, I need to use division in order to undo that. So once I do that, the 7's are going to cancel out because 7 divided by 7 is just 1. I'm just left with the m here. Well, use your calculator if you need to. 28 divided by 7 is just going to be a 4. So m equals 4 would be my final answer for number 1. So let's look back at what we just did there. We combined like terms first. Then we isolated our variable by first adding that 23 over and then dividing by 7. So there's a couple steps we had to take in that problem. Remember, you can always check your work by plugging that m back in if you would like. Let's look at example 2. So for example 2, again, I'm going to go back to my steps. I always want to use the distributive property first. So this one has the distributive property, it has that number outside of parentheses. So I'm going to distribute that 2. 2 times x is going to give me a 2x. I just smush them right together. 2 times a negative 4 is going to give me a minus 8 equals 12. So right here I have 2x minus 8 equals 12. So I distributed. The second step is to combine like terms. I don't see any like terms on the same side of my equal sign, because looking at my problem, I have a 2x and a minus 8. Those are not like terms, so that means I'm going to go right into step 3. And I'm going to move things over so that I can get that x by itself. So the first step I'm going to do with that minus 8, I'm going to add 8 to both sides. Got to use inverse operations. So when I do that, that's going to cancel out. I'm left with 2x equals 12 plus 8 is 20. Now my last step is I want to divide both sides by 2 still to get rid of that 2 next to the x. This is good. The 2's cancel out. I'm just left with x on one side equals 20 divided by 2 is 10. So my final answer would be x equals 10. So reviewing that problem one more time. So for number 2, the first step I did was I distributed. So I distributed first that 2 times x, which is 2x, minus 2 times 4, which is 8. Because there's no like terms, I did not combine like terms. So I moved right on to step 3, and I'm isolating that variable. So I used some inverse operations. I added 8 to both sides, and then I divided by 2 to get my final answer of x equals 10. So that is how you solve equations when you have combining like terms and the distributive property. So there's a couple of your turns right here that I want you to try on your own. There are, I think, 9 of them. Before you do that, I'm going to go over one more example with you, and that is number 2. So this one is taking all the steps and kind of putting them together. So remember, for number 2, I always use the distributive property first. So I'm going to draw my line down the equal sign. I'm going to use the distributive property. 3 times x is 3x. 3 times 1 is going to be minus 3. And then I'm just going to drop down that plus 9. That 15, I did nothing with those. So you need to be super organized with your work here. This is what I expect you to see. When I'm looking at your work, or when Ms. Keys is looking at your work, we expect you to be distributing like this and really dropping everything down. Okay? I distributed. Let's go back to my steps. After you distribute, you combine like terms. So let's see if we have any like terms on the same side of the equal sign. So I have this minus 3 and this plus 9. I'm going to want to combine those. So if I combine those, negative 3 plus 9, use your calculator if you need to, that's going to be a 6. Drop everything else down. That's a positive 6. So I am going to put a plus sign here because it's a positive 6. I'm dropping everything else down that I didn't deal with. Okay, so I distributed. That's step 1. Step 2, combine like terms. Step 3, we're going to get that variable by itself. So I want to get this x right here by itself. So let's use some inverse operations. I'm going to subtract 6 from both sides. So I'm left with 9 equals 3x, because 15 minus 6 is 9. My last step is I'm going to divide by 3. So you always divide by the number that's right next to the variable. So I need to get rid of that 3, so I need to divide both sides by 3, and I get x equals 3 as my final answer. So that one I wanted to go over just because it combines all 3 things. We distributed, we combine like terms, and then we solve for the number. All right, so I want you to do the rest of those your turns by yourself, making sure you're taking your time with those, really showing your work, and then move on to the choice activity and the objective quiz for this unit. All right, good luck with that.